I believe I am live. Calix Boxing here. Was reading up that Errol Spence, he pretty much, he didn't formally announce it, but he said that the Porter fight is happening in September. So my initial thought to Spence versus Porter when I read this interview was, I like it. It's a good fight. It's a fight between two guys in the top five at 147. I think pretty much everybody would acknowledge that Porter's a top five guy at the division. A guy, I think he's riding a 4 or 5 fight winning streak since the loss to Thurman. And the loss to Thurman really is in question. A lot of people, including myself, would argue that he edged out Thurman in that fight, fought very well. And he's come back very well since the fight years ago, the loss with Kell Brook. So he's done a lot. However, he's still missing that big win on his resume. Has some decent wins against Danny Garcia, a guy I don't think much of. A win against another guy I don't think much of, Broner. However, they are names. And they are guys who are overvalued, which means that there are people out there who think highly of those two guys. So he has some names on his resume. However, that big win is eluding him. And this gives him the opportunity to have that big win and catapult himself into top 2 or 3 in the division, along with Crawford and Pacquiao. Now, speaking of Crawford, after I initially thought, oh, Spence versus Porter, good fight. I like that fight. And immediately came the name Crawford. I thought, why isn't it Terrence Crawford? And once again, it speaks to the politics of boxing, how difficult the business side of boxing makes it for the best fights to be made. And it's frustrating for a guy like me who follows multiple sports. For people who just follow boxing, I don't think it's as frustrating because I think it's something they're used to. They see it all the time, and it's all they see. When you follow other sports, you follow football, basketball, baseball, you know it might take a while for the best to play the best. It might take all season, but eventually it's going to happen, and you know it's going to happen by the end of the year, before the end of the year lets out for that particular sport. For this fight and for other big fights, we saw it with Pacquiao Mayweather. We saw it with other fights that were other matchups that were spoiled. I mean, go back to Juan Ma versus Gamboa, a fight that was completely spoiled because both fighters were upset before that big fight could happen. And that big fight was on the table and it was there. Instead, they decided to milk it for many reasons, and most of it due to politics, and the fight never occurred. And it ended up being a bad thing for both fighters that it never occurred. So sometimes it could backfire. And Spence versus Crawford, I don't think it's going to be one of those things where the fight is spoiled, because I tend to think that Spence is the only guy who could beat Crawford. Crawford's the only guy who could beat Spence. I think they're two special fighters in the same division. You could argue two guys in the top 5 pound for pound right now. And that's what makes it frustrating for me, is the fight is right there. And it's so easy to make. It's so easy to make. However, the politics gets in the way. This guy's with this promoter. This guy's with this manager. This guy fights on this network. This guy fights on that network. And the fight, is just going to not happen. And it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen each fight. And there'll be some posturing. This promoter will say, oh, I threw this offer on the table and they're not responding. And the other promoter will say the same thing, or the other manager will say the same thing. So it'll be frustrating. However, all you can hope for in the process is that you get good fights nonetheless. And this is one of those. Spence versus Porter is a good fight. And I think it'll be a very tough fight for Porter stylistically. It's going to be tough for him to find angles. It's going to be tough for him to find that territory within the boxing ring to get off shots against Spence. And Spence is an offensive guy as well, so he'll be able to get in there and bully Porter as well. So it's just going to be a tough fight for Porter. However, it's a good fight. It's a good fight. It's a good matchup. It does something for both fighters. It keeps the haters off of Spence, as long as he's not fighting Crawford. And you can say, oh, it's not Spence's fault. It's the promoters. Look, I believe in extreme ownership, so it is Spence's fault at the end of the day. I mean, I understand the politics. It is Crawford's fault at the end of the day. They work for him. These guys could be more vocal about demanding these fights. I I get it. However, 30 years from now, people aren't going to be saying, "Oh, Crawford didn't fight these guys because these guys were in the PBC and he was with Top Rank." No, they're going to be saying, "Where are the fights?" And right now, Crawford doesn't have those names on his resume, and he needs to figure out a way to get those names on his resume. So as long as Spence versus Crawford is held back, it's not good for either guy. However, like I said, you just hope for decent fights in the meantime, and this is one of them. So Spence versus Porter. Let me know what